is that there are so many more satellites and devices up there, including our own. So, and that means that there's much more imagery, much more data, and it's much more timely. So.
You're listening to Beyond the Claim, the show for forward-thinking risk and claims professionals curious about the latest industry trends, winning strategies, and stories from influential leaders. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Claim. I'm your host, Wayne Brand, Head of Corporate Client Practice at Crawford. Today we're on site at RIMS Conference in San Diego, and I'm delighted to be speaking with Stephen Lathrope, Senior Vice President of ICEYE. ICEYE, as you will know, owns and operates the world's largest synthetic aperture radar satellite constellation and are the only satellite constellation focused on the reinsurance industry. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Wayne. It's great to have the opportunity to speak here at RIM.
So I wonder if you could give our listeners an introduction to ICEYE, giving us some insight into the size and scope and scale of ICEYE.
Sure.
Constellation, and also your role.
Sure, absolutely. Well, you've done a great job in the introduction there. I mean, as you say, we build and operate our own constellation of satellites. As you say, they're enabled with what's called synthetic aperture radar. So it's a particular type of active sensor radar technology that sort of sends a signal and receives a signal that bounces back from whatever it sees on the Earth's surface. So we use that for a range of applications, but we've got a real focus on insurance. We've had that focus for the last 3 or 4 years. The company's been building those satellites for about the last 7 or 8. And we've launched more than 35. So we now have the largest constellation of that technology. And that means that we can get those sort of radar eyes, if you like, over pretty much anywhere on the Earth's surface 6 to 8 times a day. And for our insurance customers, that means that when there's a natural catastrophe, we can very quickly start to capture radar images of what's happening on the ground. So the company is scaling up fast around that technology across defense, intelligence, but also very much natural catastrophe reporting and near-term prediction for insurance and for emergency services.
Okay, great. Thank you for that insight. So before we get into talking into more detail around ICEYE's flood and wildfire data sets, could you explain the difference between SAR and optical imagery and the benefits of it?
Sure, absolutely. So the SAR, the synthetic aperture radar technology, as I say, it's an active sensor. So it sends a signal, which means it's very different to optical. So optical is basically a photograph, and that relies on the sunlight. So for a start, you can only get a good or any useful optical image of Earth when it's daytime, when there's the sun reflecting off the Earth's surface. The second feature of, whereas SAR is 24 hours a day, day or night, another feature is that the radar signal goes straight through the clouds or the smoke that might be above a wildfire or whatever, or through volcanic ash. So essentially, it's kind of an always-on observation technology, whereas optical is dependent on being able to have the right atmospheric conditions. You know,
and why is it so valuable to the industry?
Well, it's valuable to the industry around natural catastrophes because of that immediacy of understanding of what's happening on the Earth's surface. So, the industry's had access to different types of radar technology and different types of optical imagery from space for a long time. But what's really happened over the last few years, as we've been through what's sometimes called the sort of revolution of new space, is that there are so many more satellites and devices up there, including our own. So, and that means that there's much more imagery, much more data, and it's much more timely. So, you mentioned that we have a flood product. With flood, Hurricane Ian's a great example of where the meteorologists we have on the team were watching the event moving towards landfall in Florida, and we were able to start to capture imagery and capture a huge volume. So we captured something like 75% of the area of Florida over the course of that event, 180 radar images, whereas, 4 or 5 years ago, or from any other source other than ours, you can't get anything like that amount of data. And it means that the intelligence for the industry, for use in claims or in understanding historical events, is much higher resolution, much more complete and much more rapid than it ever has been before.
Right, thank you. So we're all, I guess, seeing and feeling the ongoing threats of floods and wildfires around the world and globally. How does access to the satellite data help insurers and insureds plan for a flood event?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the adoption of this technology is moving in a lot of different directions really quite quickly. So a lot of our customers currently use that for flood and for wildfire now, use that sort of very rapid understanding of what's happening on the ground, that situational awareness, to inform their own operations about what is they're likely to have to deal with. So, what is the extent of the flooding? And we're able to report on the depth of water as well by sort of subtracting what we see from where we know the ground surface is. So we can tell our customers how deep is the water on average around the perimeter of an individual building, for instance. So, for immediate situation awareness, how many buildings have been affected? How badly are some of those affected? Where are we likely to have to send, our team in order to provide help? Which customers do we want to send a provisional payment to because we know they're in trouble? How much accommodation should we provision now rather than waiting until we've had notification of the claim or whatever? So, first sets of use cases around the industry for us were all about claims and response and awareness and management, triage and management of claims.
No.
We're being used, though, in underwriting as well, and in refinement of risk models and handling reserves and so on. So there's a broad spectrum. And it's all about really the creativity of the industry and how quickly our different customers are able to think about just how much value they can unlock from the data.
That's great. I think you've touched on some of this, but can you talk us through how you use the data live in an ongoing situation to positively impact the outcomes?
Sure. So let's stick with flood, and then I'll give you a wildfire example, if that's okay. So, we have, on our team, we have meteorologists who are watching atmospheric conditions 24/7. We make near-term predictions about where we expect those conditions to turn into a flood. And we use those predictions to inform our own team about where we want them to direct the satellites to capture imagery. So we don't change the satellite's orbit, but as each one is passing, and they orbit in 1.5 hours, they're very quick, we tell the satellites where do we want them to take an image. And then we knit those images together, along with other data from flood gauges, river gauges, social media images, to synthesize a report on where the water is, and to tell our customers the extent and the depth of water within 24 hours. And then for a bigger event, we update it. We're doing release 8 of, it's the 8th day of the flooding that we're following currently in Texas, for example. So every day we update. For wildfire, we use the technology slightly differently. We can't see the fire because it's not, optical image might be able to see the fire, might be able to see the smoke, but of course we don't see any of that. What we can do, though, is look at an area that is being affected by a fire, and we can see it changing the shape of the buildings because SAR, Synthetic Aperture Radar, essentially measures structures and shapes. We can see when a building-shaped thing has no longer got those angles, so we can tell. So for the terrible event in Maui, the Lahaina fire, we were able to capture within 3 hours data that showed us which buildings were damaged, and we reported within about 12 hours individual property level damage to our customers. So it's that immediacy, and that's how we do it. We predict a little, and then we respond and report on the detail at high resolution.
Okay, so I guess just shifting focus a little bit into those kinds of the types of organisations that are using your data. Are governments and public sector agencies using your data in a similar way? And can you give any examples?
Sure. Absolutely. So one of our customers, given that we're sat here at RIMS, one of our customers here in the US is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So they consume our reporting on events to help direct resources in the field. Another customer that we work with in a very similar way is the Australian government. So we're very proud that, from time to time our analysis will make it to the table of the emergency services, but then also, we've got a great photograph of the Prime Minister of Australia looking at a flood map that's got our data on it, which, that's on the wall somewhere. So, so government agencies doing emergency response and planning for resilience are our major focus alongside the insurance industry.
Okay, so will kind of the availability of data drive innovation in this space in the future?
100%. So I think, we all of us see new sources of data emerging all the time. We talk about the Internet of Things, sensors in our cars, in our phones, all over the place. And Earth observation technology is just one of those. And we're seeing, a real desire from some insurers, third-party administrators, reinsurers, brokers, captives and risk managers as well to kind of understand how they can consume that data and get value from it. And there's lots of opportunity. Sometimes the integration of the data that we can provide with our own data is the biggest challenge. But there's a load of innovation in product and in service going on.
Thanks, Steve. So we're here at RIMS, the world's largest risk management conference. I think there's around 10,000 risk professionals on site and a great number who work in companies with, captive insurance companies. How can ICEYE's data be used by captive?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, the scale of this event's enormous, isn't it? And we were chatting earlier. This is the second RIMS that we've attended, and we're here and spent some time at the Risk Summit in Bermuda earlier in the year, just primarily to understand more about the captive sector, talk to more risk managers about where they retain property cat risk, where they don't, but they have an interest in how their insurer partners deal with it, how their partners that handle claims for them deal with it. So we're very much, our hypothesis is very much that the same use cases exist, even if the insurance, if you like, if the management of the risk happens somewhere else. So we are here primarily to try and find within those 10,000 people, those people who are making decisions about how to manage captives, how to manage the risk side, how to manage the claims side of those, their partners, obviously, and the risk managers in those corporates or in those public sector organisations.
Great, thanks, Steve. I think that's
absolute pleasure. Yeah,
we're covering today, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Cheers.
You've been listening to Beyond the Claim, a podcast for risk and claims leaders. To ensure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you use Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to give us a quick rating for the show. Just tap the number of stars that you think the podcast deserves. Until next time, stay curious and keep innovating.